Isabella Montgomery had it all: wealth, status, and a future dictated by her powerful family. But when faced with an impossible choice between love and legacy, she chose to walk away from her opulent life and lie for herself. The journey was filled with heart-wrenching decisions, rejection, and self-discovery. Her courage to choose love over power challenges everything she thought she knew about happiness. Will she find freedom in her new life, or will the past pull her back? Stay tuned to hear Isabella's bold and emotional story unfold. Where are you tuning in from? Don't forget to subscribe for more. Isabella Montgomery stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the diamond necklace that hung delicately around her neck. The stone shimmered beneath the golden chandelier, casting a soft glow that filled the lavish room with a sense of opulence. It was a gift from her mother, Margaret, on her 25th birthday, a symbol of the legacy she had been born into, the expectations placed upon her like a heavy cloak she could never shed. Her fingers lingered on the cool, polished gems, but there was no warmth in her touch. The necklace, beautiful as it was, felt like a burden. She sighed, her reflection staring back at her with the same empty eyes that had gazed at this mirror countless times. A life meticulously crafted by her parents, one that ran on the currency of wealth, status, and alliances. Isabella had always been told that love would come second. It was a distant idea, reserved for the likes of fairy tales, while reality demanded something more pragmatic, a marriage that would align with the family's interests, something that would secure the Montgomery legacy for generations to come. Her parents had cultivated her to be the perfect daughter, the perfect trophy for the perfect marriage, where the right last name mattered far more than the person it belonged to. The more she looked at herself in that mirror, the more she wondered if she had ever truly existed at all. She had met countless suitors over the years, men from the most powerful families, each one more eager than the last to marry her. Their conversations weren't about dreams or passions, but mergers and investments. Talk of empires, not emotions. Talk of empires, not emotions. They saw her as an asset, a piece of property to secure their place in the world. The grand proposals, the promises of stability and security had always left her cold. The jewels, the gowns, the luxury that surrounded her every day, all of it seemed hollow. The constant attention, the unsolicited admiration. It all felt like a performance, and no matter how many diamonds she wore, no matter how many suitors lined up, her heart remained untouched. She had always known there had to be more than this. But the question was, where could she find it? Then came the moment that changed everything. It wasn't during a gala or a boardroom meeting, places where her family's influence and wealth had placed her time and time again. It happened on one of the rare occasions she managed to slip away from the clutches of her family's suffocating expectations. Isabella had always enjoyed charity work, not because it looked good for the press, but because it gave her a chance to feel human. A chance to step outside the gilded cage of high society and connect with something real. That day, she convinced her parents to let her attend a food distribution event at a community shelter in a less privileged part of the city. It was a far cry from the extravagant ballrooms and high-rise towers she had grown accustomed to. She arrived expecting to blend in with the other volunteers, to be just another face handing out bags of food. But that was when she saw him, Elliot Grant. He wasn't like the other volunteers. While the rich and privileged milled about, posing for photographs and offering assistance from a distance, Elliot was right in the thick of it. He was lifting heavy crates, talking to people. His sleeves rolled up, his shirt damp with sweat, but none of it seemed to bother him. There was something undeniably magnetic about him. Something real. He wasn't doing this for recognition or for status. He was there because he cared, and as Isabella watched him interact with the elderly woman struggling to carry her supplies, she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. Unlike the men she knew, Elliot didn't look at her expensive clothes or care about the name she carried. He simply saw her. "Do you need help with that?" she asked. Her voice startled him, pulling him out of his conversation. When he turned to look at her, she saw something different in his eyes. He wasn't interested in impressing her. There was no flicker of recognition about her family's name, no attempt to flatter her. "Are you offering to help or just supervising?" he teased, lifting a crate effortlessly. Isabella blinked, taken aback by his honesty, his directness. "I suppose that depends," she said, half laughing. "Do you think I look like someone who supervises?" "Honestly, yeah. You look like you belong at a fancy fundraiser, not sweating it out in a food bank," Elliot chuckled. Isabella smirked. Looks can be deceiving. That was the moment. A small, seemingly insignificant exchange, but to Isabella, it was as if the walls around her had started to crumble. There was something refreshing about him, something honest, something she hadn't realized she had been missing. And as she spent more time alongside him, helping hand out supplies, talking to people, she felt more alive than she had in years. It wasn't just the charity work. It wasn't just the charity work. It was the connection she felt with him. Elliot wasn't asking her about her family's wealth. He wasn't enamored by her status. He saw her, truly saw her. For the first time in her life, Isabella didn't feel like just a Montgomery. She felt like herself. Over the next few weeks, Isabella found herself returning to the shelter, not just out of a sense of obligation to the charity, but to see Elliot again. What started as a chance encounter had blossomed into something deeper, something she had never expected. Each visit became an escape, a brief reprieve from the suffocating world of wealth and expectation that had always been her reality. Elliot was there every time, his presence a stark contrast to the sterile, controlled life she had known. He wasn't like the men her family had tried to push her toward, men who were only interested in her status or her family's influence. Elliot never once looked at her as the daughter of a billionaire. He saw her for who she truly was. Their conversations were easy, flowing effortlessly as they worked side by side, unpacking crates of food or sorting donations. She learned that Elliot had been volunteering at shelters for years, organizing food drives, and helping families who were struggling to make ends meet. It wasn't just a passing phase for him. It was a calling, a part of his life he was deeply committed to. He spoke of his dreams of helping to build a more equitable world, of creating something meaningful from nothing. His passion and dedication were infectious, and Isabella found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. For the first time in years, she felt as if she was part of something bigger than herself, something real. Elliot never made her feel uncomfortable about her wealth, never hinted at what he could gain from knowing her. He didn't care about her last name, her designer clothes, or the endless circles of influence she moved in. He treated her as an equal, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. With him, she didn't have to be the perfect Montgomery daughter, polished and poised, playing a role in her family's grand scheme. She could simply be Isabella, and that felt freeing. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. They began to share more than just moments of charity work. They shared dreams, fears, and moments of quiet intimacy. After long shifts at the shelter, they would walk through the city together, talking about everything and nothing. The conversations felt like a lifeline, like something that grounded her in a way nothing in her luxury-filled world had ever done. There was something about Elliot's sincerity, his willingness to show her his vulnerability, that made her feel safe, even in a world that had always felt isolating. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Elliot surprised her with a simple gesture. A cup of coffee from a local cafe, the kind of place where the tables were worn and the air smelled like freshly baked pastries. They sat at a corner table, the low hum of conversation surrounding them, and talked about their lives. For the first time, Isabella spoke openly about the suffocating expectations her parents had placed on her since she was a child. She told Elliot about the endless parade of suitors her parents had pushed her toward, men who saw her as little more than a means to an end. She spoke of the weight of her family's legacy and how it felt to be a pawn in a game she had never chosen to play. Elliot listened, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't interrupt or offer empty words of comfort. He simply understood. His empathy was palpable, and Isabella felt a sense of relief she hadn't known she was craving. When she finished, she looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers in a soft, reassuring touch. "You don't have to carry their weight anymore, Isabella," he said quietly. "You can choose your own path, the one that makes you happy, not the one they planned for you." Those words lingered in her mind long after the coffee had grown cold. She had always known that her life wasn't truly her own, that she was expected to conform to a mold that didn't fit. But hearing it from Elliot, hearing someone who saw her and accepted her for who she was, felt like the first step toward freedom. For the first time in a long while, she thought about what she truly wanted, not what was expected of her. And what she wanted, what she needed, was to be with Elliot. Their connection was undeniable, and Isabella found herself falling in love with him, a love that was real and raw and untainted by wealth or social standing. But as her feelings for him deepened, so did the pressure from her family. She knew that sooner or later, her parents would find out about her relationship with Elliot. And when they did, they wouldn't let her go so easily. She wasn't ready for that confrontation, but part of her knew it was inevitable. And when the time came, she would have to choose her family's expectations or the life she had found with Elliot. But for now, she allowed herself to enjoy the quiet moments they shared, knowing that in those fleeting hours, she had found something worth holding on to. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate balance for Isabella. Her life had shifted in ways she never imagined, and every moment with Elliot only confirmed what she had begun to feel deep down. She had made the right choice. No matter how much her parents' voices echoed in her head, no matter the promises of stability and wealth they dangled before her, there was something about Elliot that made all of it seem irrelevant. His world wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was real, unfiltered, and filled with purpose. A life lived without pretensions, where life lived without pretensions, where love wasn't tainted by status, and happiness wasn't an afterthought. One quiet evening, as they sat together in their small apartment, the warmth of the tiny kitchen surrounding them, Isabella watched Elliot prepare dinner. There was something undeniably comforting about the way he moved, how he took his time chopping vegetables, humming softly under his breath, lost in the rhythm of the moment. This, she realized, was what peace looked like. No board meetings, no extravagant gala invitations, no whispers about her last name. Just two people building something real together. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. Elliot glanced up from his cutting board, a curious smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Your old life," she clarified, gesturing vaguely toward the cramped, modest space they called home. "The luxury, the comforts, the kind of life I was born into." For a moment, he didn't answer, his focus returning to the food. But then he set the knife down and walked over to her, his expression serious now. "I used to. I won't lie. The temptation was always there. The thought of what could have been." He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. "But it's not real. At least not in the way I thought it was. I thought having everything would give me everything I needed. But what I needed was never in any of those things. It was in the simple stuff. The moments, the connection. I found that with you." Isabella's chest tightened, but not with the familiar feeling of anxiety she had come to expect. This time it was something else, something warm, something that made her heart flutter. She had never expected to find peace in this life, not this way. Her upbringing had always been about striving for perfection, about appeasing those around her. But with Elliot, she had learned to stop pretending. She didn't need to be the perfect daughter, the perfect heiress. She just needed to be herself. The next few days brought more clarity. The more she spent time with Elliot, the more she realized how much her old life had been built on an illusion. The ballrooms, the galas, the exclusive meetings, it was all a performance, a carefully constructed image. But Elliot had no need for any of that, and she had learned to admire him for it. It wasn't just his dedication to helping others, though that was an undeniable part of who he was. It was the way he lived his life, the ease with which he spoke of his dreams, the simplicity in his actions, the way he never seemed burdened by the weight of things that didn't matter. He didn't want to change the world for the sake of power. He wanted to change it because he believed he could. And that was something she had never seen before. Someone so deeply grounded in their own sense of self. Someone who didn't need external validation to feel complete. But with every passing day, the reality of her situation loomed over her. She couldn't ignore it forever. She couldn't ignore it forever. She was still in Montgomery, and her family wouldn't let go so easily. No matter how much she tried to distance herself from their world, their expectations were a constant shadow at the edge of her life. She knew that sooner or later, her parents would find out about her relationship with Elliot, and when they did, there would be no going back. As she lay in bed one evening, Elliot's arm draped across her waist, Isabella felt the familiar sting of doubt creep in. What if she was making the wrong choice? What if her family was right? Her heart raced as she thought about her father's stern face, her mother's calculating eyes. Would she regret turning her back on everything they had worked for? Could she truly live a life without the security and respect that her family's name offered? But then she thought of Elliot, his smile, the way he held her hand in moments of silence, how he never once judged her for the life she had led. He didn't want her to change. He just wanted her, for who she was, not for the last name she carried or the wealth in her bank account. That realization was enough to quiet her fears. She had made her decision. And though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go back to the life she had left behind. Not when she had found something real, something worth fighting for. Isabella closed her eyes, the weight of her decision settling over her. No matter what came next, she had Elliot, and that was more than enough. She had found herself in a world she never thought possible, and for the first time, she felt truly free. The days passed slowly, each one more uncertain than the last. Isabella had chosen her path. She had chosen Elliot, the life they shared, and the love that was blooming between them, but she couldn't shake the nagging voice of doubt that crept into her mind. Every morning when she woke in their small apartment, surrounded by its humble simplicity, she felt a strange mixture of peace and fear. Peace in the fact that she was finally living for herself, and fear in the knowledge that her family wouldn't let her go so easily. She had been in Montgomery for 25 years, molded by their expectations, shaped by their values. Walking away from it all wasn't something they would take lightly. Her phone buzzed one evening as she sat on the couch beside Elliot, his head resting on her lap. The familiar ringtone made her stomach twist, and her heart sank as she saw her mother's name flash across the screen. She hesitated, the phone hovering in her hand, before answering. "Sophia, it's your mother," Margaret's voice crackled through the line, sharp and unmistakable. "We need to talk." Isabella felt a wave of unease settle in her chest. She looked at Elliot, his eyes meeting hers with a silent understanding. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. She knew what he was thinking. This call had been inevitable. "I don't have anything to say to you, Mom," Isabella replied, her voice steady but laced with the emotions she had been holding back for weeks. "Sophia, please, Hear me out, Margaret continued, her tone softening, a desperate edge creeping into her voice. We've been patient with you. We've given you space. But this man you're with, he isn't suitable. You're throwing away everything we've worked for, everything your father and I have built. You can't seriously think you're making the right choice. Isabella closed her eyes, the weight of her mother's words pressing down on her like a heavy stone. She had heard this before, how Elliot wasn't worthy of her, how his humble background didn't match the grandeur of her family's name, but it stung just the same. Margaret's voice had a way of cutting through her, reaching deep into the place inside her that longed for her parents' approval. I've made my choice, Mom, Isabella said, her voice firm. I'm with Elliot, and nothing you say will change that. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment Isabella thought her mother might hang up. But instead, she spoke again, softer this time. I just want you to be happy, Sophia, Margaret said quietly. But you don't have to do this on your own. We can fix this together. You don't have to give up everything. Isabella's heart tightened. She looked down at Elliot, who had been silently listening, his hand gently resting on hers. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. I don't need you to fix anything, Isabella replied, her voice stronger now. I need to live my life, not the one you've chosen for me. I found someone who sees me for who I am. I found someone who sees me for who I am, not the name I carry. I love him, Mom. And I'm not going to apologize for that. The line fell silent again, and Isabella could almost hear the disbelief in her mother's silence. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure, Margaret said finally, her voice a mixture of defeat and resignation. But remember, you're always welcome here. You're still our daughter. Isabella didn't respond immediately. She knew what her mother meant. That offer, the words, felt hollow. She had tried to be their perfect daughter for years, to meet their impossible expectations, to be the person they wanted her to be, but she wasn't that person anymore. She hung up the phone without another word, her hands trembling slightly as she set it down on the coffee table. Elliot didn't speak, but he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. The quiet strength he exuded in that moment made her feel like she had made the right decision. She wasn't just walking away from her family's expectations. She was walking toward a future where she could be herself, a future where love wasn't conditional, where happiness didn't depend on a family name or the weight of societal approval. But even as Elliot held her, Isabella couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her stomach. Her family's words had a way of lingering, settling in the corners of her mind, planting seeds of doubt. They were her parents. They were the people who had shaped her into the woman she was today, and no matter how hard she tried to distance herself from them, part of her still longed for their acceptance. Elliot's voice broke through her thoughts, soft and reassuring. You made the right choice, Isabella. You've got me, and you've got your own path now. That's all that matters. For the first time in a long time, Isabella believed him. She kissed him gently on the cheek, the warmth of his love washing over her, silencing the echoes of her parents' voices. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Weeks passed, and the tension between Isabella and her family only grew. Her parents' calls became more frequent, each one laced with anger and disappointment. They had given her the ultimatum: choose them, or choose him, or choose him. But each time they reached out, it became clear to Isabella that their love was conditional, that her happiness was secondary to their control over her life. They wanted her to return to the safe confines of her old world, to marry a man of their choosing, to secure the legacy they had spent decades building. But the more they pushed, the more determined Isabella became to prove that she wasn't a pawn in their game anymore. Elliot, in contrast, was her anchor. The man she had fallen in love with, the man who never saw her as a prize to be won, but as a person, one with dreams, flaws, and desires of her own. Their life together, though humble, was filled with something her life with her parents never had: genuine connection. Despite the difficulties of adjusting to a small apartment, the long hours at a job she had never imagined for herself, and the emotional weight of losing her family's approval, Isabella had never felt more herself than she did when she was with Elliot. But as the days wore on, the weight of her decision pressed down on her more heavily. The rumors in high society had begun to swirl. The media caught wind of her rebellious departure, and whispers about the Montgomery heiress choosing a life with a man of no fortune were splashed across every social column. The press painted her as a woman running from the very life she had been born into, a cautionary tale for anyone who dared defy tradition. And yet, even as her name became fodder for gossip, Isabella didn't regret her choice. One night, as she and Elliot sat together in their small living room, sharing a simple dinner they had managed to scrape together, her phone rang again. This time, it was her father, Richard Montgomery. The call she had been dreading. She stared at the screen for a long moment before answering, the tension in her chest growing. "Sophia." Her father's voice was cold, but there was something else in it. A sense of finality. "We've tried to reach you. It's time to come home." Isabella's stomach turned. She knew exactly where this was going. "I'm not coming back, Dad," she replied, her voice steady, though the knot in her throat threatened to choke her. "You're making a mistake," her father continued, his words clipped. "You think this man, nobody, is going to give you the life you deserve. You think that's going to make you happy. You've abandoned everything for someone who can't offer you the security, the respect that you need." "I don't need wealth or respect from anyone but myself," Isabella said, her heart pounding. "I don't care about your legacy anymore, Dad. I don't care about your legacy anymore, Dad. I care about being with someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I represent." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when her father spoke again, his voice was softer. "You're throwing it all away, Sophia. You don't understand what you're giving up." "Maybe I do understand," Isabella answered, her voice growing stronger. "And maybe that's why I'm not coming back. Because I'm finally free of it. I'm choosing my own path, and Elliot is part of that path. Not your legacy, not your empire." Her father's silence was deafening. For a moment, Isabella thought the call had dropped, but then he spoke again. "If you walk away now, there will be no going back. You'll be dead to us." Isabella closed her eyes, the words stinging more than she'd cared to admit. But she had made her decision. There was no turning back now. "I've already made my choice," she whispered, the weight of it heavy, but right. She hung up the phone, her hands trembling, as she set it down on the table. Elliot, who had been quietly observing, reached over and took her hand in his. His touch was warm and reassuring, grounding her in a way that nothing else could. "You don't have to explain yourself to them," Elliot said softly, his voice full of understanding. "You've chosen your happiness. And that's all that matters." Isabella looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. "I don't know if I can ever go back to them, Elliot. Not after everything they've said, everything they've done to me." "You don't have to," Elliot replied, squeezing her hand. "You have me, and we'll build our own life, one step at a time. No matter what happens next, we'll face it together." In that moment, Isabella realized that while she had walked away from a life of luxury, she had gained something far more valuable. Freedom. The freedom to choose love, to choose happiness, and to be true to herself. She didn't need her parents' approval anymore. She didn't need the approval of anyone but herself. And as she sat there with Elliot, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Stronger, freer, and more in love than ever before. The transition from the life she had once known to the reality she now faced was far from easy for Isabella. The first few weeks with Elliot were grueling in ways she hadn't expected. She had walked away from a mansion full of luxury, from a world where every need was met before it was even voiced, and into an apartment that smelled faintly of old wood and stale air. The creaky floors seemed to mock her at every step, and the kitchen, small and cluttered, felt like a reminder of everything she had given up. There were nights when she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her decision settling in. The weight of her decision settling in like a stone in her chest. She had traded silken sheets for threadbare blankets, fine dining for simple rice and beans, and a life of certainty for one filled with doubt and struggle. And yet, every time she glanced over at Elliot, sitting at their small, chipped table, his eyes bright with sincerity, she knew that no matter how difficult this new life was, it was better than anything she had left behind. There was something so genuine about him, so untainted by the world that had once suffocated her. With Elliot, she didn't have to pretend. She didn't have to be the perfect Montgomery daughter, the dutiful heir to an empire. She could simply be Isabella. But the challenges came swiftly, one after another, like a storm that refused to pass. Isabella started working at a small bookstore, a job she would have scoffed at months before. The owner, a kind but frazzled woman named Claire, was barely able to make ends meet, and though the job was simple, it was exhausting. Every morning, Isabella would walk to work, the soles of her shoes worn from the long walk, the sharp sting of the cold air biting at her skin. She had never experienced anything like this. The fatigue weighed on her, but it also gave her a strange sense of satisfaction. She was doing something for herself, earning her own way, no longer relying on her family's name or wealth to navigate the world. Elliot, too, continued his work at the community shelter. Their schedules were erratic, leaving little time for rest. By the time they returned to their cramped apartment in the evenings, both of them were exhausted. Yet, despite the fatigue, they would sit together at their small table, eating whatever meager meal they had prepared, and talk. They spoke of their dreams, their fears, and the future. Their conversations, once filled with light-hearted jokes, had now taken on a deeper, more reflective tone. Isabella found herself listening to Elliot in a way she never had before. Really listening. He talked about the families he helped, the difference he wanted to make in the world, and the legacy he wanted to leave. And though they had so little, she knew that their lives were filled with something far more valuable than the wealth she had left behind. Purpose. But the weight of her decisions still hung over her. The phone calls from her parents became fewer, but the silence from her family was louder than any argument. There were no more grand offers to come back to the fold, no more threats, but Isabella felt the absence of their approval like an open wound. She had imagined that walking away would bring a sense of freedom, but instead, she felt isolated. When she walked through the streets of the city, she was no longer the daughter of a powerful family. She was just another woman blending in with the crowd. It wasn't that she missed the attention. It was the loss of connection. It was the loss of connection, of being part of self. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, Isabella returned home to find a letter waiting for her on the doorstep. The envelope was thick, with a golden seal pressed into the paper. She stared at it for a long moment, unsure of what to expect. Elliot was already inside, sitting on the couch, his head resting against the worn fabric. When she showed him the letter, his expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "It's from my parents," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. She had not heard from them in weeks, and the thought of reopening the doctor made her stomach tighten. Elliot looked at her, his eyes soft with understanding. "Do you want to open it?" Isabella hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she slid the seal open. She unfolded the letter slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she read the words. It was an invitation to return. Not just to their world, but to a place she could never have imagined. The life she had left behind, now offering her a place among the elite once again. They had softened. Her parents had changed their tune, now offering her everything she had walked away from. Security, wealth, status, all with the promise that her life would be returned to her, that she could have everything she once had. They had, in their own way, begged for her return. But as she read the words, Isabella felt nothing but a hollow emptiness inside. She could feel the weight of their words, the unspoken promise of comfort. But there was no longing, no desire to return to that life, not anymore. Her heart had found something better, something real. She folded the letter carefully, setting it aside. She didn't need to say anything. Elliot knew what she was thinking. She was not going back. Not to them. Not to the life they had planned for her. She had already chosen the life she wanted, one built not on wealth, but on love. And as she sat beside Elliot, their small apartment now feeling more like home than any mansion ever could, Isabella finally felt the weight of the past lift off her shoulders. No matter what came next, she had made her choice, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the right one. The days that followed were some of the most challenging of Isabella's life. Despite the initial relief of making her decision, she couldn't shake the feeling that the weight of her past was still hanging over her. The cold apartment they now called home felt smaller, more confining as time passed. The once sweet sense of freedom she had felt when walking away from her family's empire was now clouded by the harsh realities of life without their support. There were days when the struggle seemed endless. Long hours at work, barely enough money to cover rent, and the constant hum of doubt in her mind about whether she had made the right choice. Elliot, as always, was a steadying presence in her life. He didn't pressure her to feel anything but what she already felt, offering only his love and unwavering support. Yet, even with him by her side, there were moments when Isabella couldn't help but wonder if she had been too hasty. Her family's disapproval had never felt so tangible as it did now. Her father's words echoed in her head like a relentless drumbeat. "You're throwing it all away. The luxury, the status, the power. Everything that once defined her world now seemed like a distant dream. She missed the comfort, the security of a life where every decision had already been made for her. She missed the ease of knowing she had a place in the world, even if that place came with a price. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, there was one thing she knew for certain. She couldn't go back. She couldn't return to the person her family had molded her to be. The guilt, the constant pressure to live up to their impossible expectations. It was suffocating. And Elliot, despite the struggle they were facing, gave her something her family never could. A sense of authenticity, of being seen and loved for who she truly was, not the mask she wore as a Montgomery. One rainy evening, as they sat together on the small couch, Elliot turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "You've been quiet," he said softly. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Isabella hesitated. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't want to burden him with her doubts, but the truth was, she could no longer keep them inside. "I'm not sure anymore, Elliot," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are days when it feels like I've made the wrong choice. Like, maybe I should have stayed. Maybe I should have stayed. Maybe I should have found a way to make peace with my family, with the life they wanted for me." Elliot's expression softened, and he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Isabella, I know this isn't easy, but the person you are now, strong, independent, choosing what's right for your heart, that's what matters. You didn't walk away because you didn't want a good life. You walked away because you wanted to live a life that's true to you. And that's something no one can take from you. Isabella looked into his eyes, searching for the comfort she knew he could give her. But what if I'm wrong? What if my family's right? What if all this? This struggle is just a way of punishing myself for stepping out of their world. You're not punishing yourself, Isabella, he said, his voice firm with conviction. You're giving yourself the chance to live the life you've always wanted but didn't know how to reach. You're creating something real. And that takes courage. More courage than any of them will ever know. His words settled in her chest, a soothing balm for her weary heart. She had spent so long trying to meet the expectations of others, to conform to a life that was not her own, that she had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. She had lost sight of what truly mattered. The love they shared, the simple moments they stole from the chaos of their daily lives. Those moments of laughter after a long day at work, the warmth of his hand in hers, the comfort of knowing they were building something from scratch, together. Elliot smiled at her, and in that moment, Isabella felt a shift inside her. The doubts that had been swirling in her mind seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. She had made her choice, and though the road ahead might not be easy, she was no longer afraid. Not when she had Elliot by her side, not when she had found a love that was real, not for the world she had left behind, but for the world she had left behind, but for the life they were creating together. You're right, Isabella said, her voice filled with newfound certainty. I can't go back. I'm here now, and I have you. That's more than enough. She leaned in and kissed him softly, the weight of her past lifting with every second they shared in the warmth of their small apartment. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was all she needed. Isabella had never imagined that her life could change so drastically, nor had she anticipated how deeply it would affect her. The weeks after she left her family's home were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The initial exhilaration of making her own decisions, of claiming a life that was entirely hers, slowly began to fade into the grueling reality of what she had chosen. The struggles, both physical and emotional, were more challenging than she had prepared for. She and Elliot made ends meet with their small incomes, often scraping by with just enough for rent and groceries. There were moments when Isabella wondered if she had been too quick to throw away everything she had known. Could she really leave behind the life of luxury, the comfort of her family's name, and the support that had always been there for her? But as she sat on the small, worn couch they shared, Elliot beside her, the doubts that plagued her were always met with the same quiet reassurance. He never asked for anything more than her honesty, never pressured her to feel something she didn't. With him, there was no facade, just genuine love, the kind of love that didn't depend on money or status. And yet, as much as she clung to that truth, there were moments when the weight of her decision pressed down on her with an almost unbearable heaviness. She missed the certainty that had once been her life. She missed the world she had known, despite its constraints. She missed the ease with which everything had fallen into place before. The life with Elliot, while real and full of love, was hard, and sometimes love alone was enough to quiet the ache of uncertainty. It wasn't long before she got her answer, though in a way she hadn't expected. One rainy afternoon, as she came home from her shift at the bookstore, she found an envelope waiting for her on the doorstep. Her name was written in bold, familiar handwriting. Her father's. Her heart raced as she picked it up, torn between the instinct to throw it away and the need to know what it said. Elliot was inside, as he usually was, his quiet presence always a comfort. She walked in, and he looked up at her with a soft smile. Without saying anything, she handed him the letter. He knew exactly what it was before she said a word. "Is it from them?" he asked gently, his voice steady as he accepted the letter from her hands. Isabella nodded, her throat tight with the emotions she couldn't quite articulate. "It's from my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot tore his gaze from the envelope to meet her eyes. "You don't have to open it if you don't want to. You've made your choice, Isabella. Nothing they say can change that." But Isabella hesitated, torn between her instinct to run away from the past and the desire to finally face the finality of her decision. With a quiet breath, she tore open the envelope. The letter was short, and the words written inside were colder than she had expected. It wasn't an apology, nor was it an invitation to return. No, it was far worse. It was a demand, masked as a suggestion, a request for her to come back to the family fold, not as a daughter, but as a figurehead. They wanted her back, but only because they saw her as an asset, a tool to be used once again in their never-ending game of power. They wanted her to return to the life of endless expectations, of obligations, of a future that wasn't truly hers, the same life she had walked away from. And the last line, the one that stung the most, reminded her that there would be no room for Elliot in this equation. If she came back, she would have to leave him behind. As she finished reading, the room felt heavier. She could feel the weight of the letter, but more than that, she could feel the weight of everything she had walked away from. The gilded life, the privileges, the comforts. It was all still there, waiting for her, just one step back. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more the choice became clear. It wasn't about wealth or power or a name. It was about the life she had built with Elliot. The simple life, the real life. And she knew now more than ever that she could never go back. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table, her hands shaking slightly. Elliot stood up, stepping closer to her. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her, offering the warmth and comfort that no amount of money or status ever could. For the first time since she had left, Isabella felt the weight of her decision lift off her shoulders. Her family's expectations, their demands, had no hold over her anymore. "I'm not going back," she whispered, the words coming out with surprising clarity. "I won't go back to that life. I have you. And that's all I need." Elliot smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Then we'll make our own way. Together, always." In that moment, Isabella realized that the life she had left behind wasn't just a world of luxury. It was a world of chains, of suffocating expectations that had tried to define her every move. And as she stood there in the arms of the man she loved, she understood that true freedom wasn't about wealth or power. It was about the ability to choose who you were, who you loved, and how you wanted to live. And with Elliot, she had everything she needed to create a life that was truly hers. Isabella stood at the window, the rain tapping lightly against the glass. A soft murmur in the background, she stared out into the darkening city. The weight of the decision she had made still pressed on her, but now it was different. Her mind had settled into a quiet resolve. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she no longer felt torn. She had walked away from her family, from the life they had meticulously crafted for her, from all the expectations that had shaped her world. She had chosen Elliot, not because of the life they had together, but because of what he represented. A love that wasn't based on wealth, status, or obligation. But even now, as she looked out at the city's skyline, she could feel the pull of her past. She wasn't sure if she could ever truly escape the shadows of who she had once been. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the stillness of the apartment. She hesitated before answering, her heart fluttering in her chest. She knew who it was without even looking at the screen. It was her mother, Margaret, calling yet again. It had been weeks since their last conversation, but the pressure from her family had never truly stopped. It was a constant undercurrent in her life, a reminder that no matter how far she went, they would always be watching, always waiting for her to return. Isabella took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her head. She had made her choice, and no matter what her parents said, nothing would change that. She picked up the phone, her voice steady, but her heart was still heavy, with uncertainty. "Hello, Mom." Sophia, her mother's voice came through softer than usual, but still tinged with that same sharpness. "We need to talk, please. Your father and I. We've been thinking a lot about everything. About you. About your choice." Isabella closed her eyes, the familiar ache starting to form in her chest. "I've made my choice, Mom. I'm not coming back. You have to accept that." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Isabella thought her mother might hang up. But Margaret's voice finally came back, quieter now, as though the fight had drained out of her. "You're still our daughter, Sophia. We just don't understand why you've chosen this life. You could have had everything. A future of power, respect. Everything your father and I built for you. Why throw it all away?" Isabella's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak, her voice trembling only slightly. "I didn't throw it away, Mom. I'm choosing a life that's mine. A life where I don't have to live for someone else's expectations. I want a life that's real, not one built on appearances. I want love, not obligation." Her mother was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, there was an almost desperate edge to her voice. "But Sophia, you don't understand. You're throwing away everything we've worked for. Everything that makes you. You can't just walk away from this, from us." Isabella felt a pang of guilt twist in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. "I've already walked away, Mom. I've made my decision. And I'm not going back." The silence that followed felt suffocating, a heavy, unspoken truth hanging between them. Isabella could hear her mother's soft, shaky breath on the other end of the line, but she didn't speak again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Margaret's voice broke through. "Just remember, you'll always be our daughter, no matter what." Her words were strained, as if she were trying to convince herself more than Isabella. Isabella swallowed hard, forcing the lump in her throat down. "Goodbye, Mom." And with that, she ended the call. She stood in silence for a long while, the weight of the conversation settling deep within her. The relief she had hoped for never came. It wasn't that she regretted her decision. She didn't, but hearing her mother's voice, so full of hurt, so full of the expectations that had always been a part of her life, made it all feel more final than she had anticipated. There was no going back now. There was no return to the world of glittering ballrooms and high society gatherings. And as she set the phone down on the table, the quietness of their small apartment felt both comforting and lonely. Elliot, who had been watching her from across the room, stood and walked over to her. Without a word, he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not alone, Isabella," he said softly, his voice full of reassurance. "Not anymore. You made your choice, and I'm with you, always." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and love. She had made her choice, and it was a hard one, but it was the right one. In that moment, with Elliot by her side, she knew that no matter what the future held, she had chosen the only thing that truly mattered, herself, and she would never regret that. Isabella had always imagined that her life would follow a clear path. She was born into a world of wealth and status, where every decision had already been made for her. Love had always been secondary to duty, and the idea of following her heart had seemed like a distant, unreachable dream. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, she began to realize that her life was no longer about what others expected of her. It was about choosing what made her truly happy, even if it meant walking away from everything she had ever known. The decision to leave her family and the life they had planned for her was not an easy one. In the beginning, she had clung to the idea that her family would understand, that they would eventually come to accept her choice. But as time went on, she began to see the truth. They were not going to change. They would never understand her need for freedom, her desire to choose her own path. And so Isabella chose to let go of the past and step into the unknown with Elliot by her side. Life with Elliot was nothing like what she had imagined for herself. It was messy, uncertain, and at times frustrating. There were moments when she doubted her decision, moments when the weight of her family's disapproval threatened to pull her back into the world she had left behind. But then, in the quiet moments, when they sat together on their worn-out couch, laughing over a simple meal they had made together, Isabella realized something important. She was finally living for herself. She had found something real. In Elliot's presence, she found a peace she had never known before. Despite the challenges, there was a certain joy in their simplicity. They lived day to day, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, but knowing they had each other. The small apartment they shared was filled with the kind of love that couldn't be bought or planned. It was born from shared moments of vulnerability, from supporting one another through the tough times, and from building something real, brick by brick. Every night, when they sat together, whether it was over dinner or simply sharing the silence, Isabella realized that no amount of money or luxury could ever replace what she had with Elliot. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, Isabella returned home to find Elliot waiting for her. His smile was soft, comforting, and in that moment, she felt a wave of warmth wash over her. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was enough to reassure her. But as she sat beside him on the couch, her heart heavy with the weight of the day, she knew she needed to confront the next step. She needed to face the reality that, even though she had chosen Elliot, her family wasn't going to let go so easily. Elliot's fingers gently brushed hers, his touch grounding her as he looked at her with those steady, understanding eyes. "You know, we don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "Whatever happens next, we have each other. And that's enough." Isabella exhaled, her chest tightening as she leaned against him. "But I'm scared, Elliot. What if my parents never accept this? What if I've made a mistake?" "You haven't," he said, his voice unwavering. "You've chosen to live for yourself, and that's the most powerful thing you can do. We're not perfect, but we're building something real here. Something that matters." The truth in his words settled deep in her heart. She had always been told that wealth and status were the things that mattered most in life. But now, as she looked at Elliot, as she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against hers, she realized that what truly mattered was the love they shared. It wasn't about money or legacy or a family name. It was about choosing to love and be loved, choosing to live a life that felt true to who she was. And in that moment, as the world outside raged on, Isabella knew that no matter what happened next, she had made the right choice. She had chosen love, and she had chosen herself. And with Elliot by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next, together. The day arrived sooner than Isabella had anticipated. The day her past finally came knocking at her door. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that seemed to carry the weight of expectation with every passing hour. She had spent the morning at the bookstore, sorting through new arrivals and keeping her mind occupied. But as soon as she returned home, the familiar tension settled in her chest. It was as if the universe had conspired to pull her back into the life she had fought so hard to leave behind. Elliot was in the kitchen, preparing their usual evening meal. The sounds of him humming softly as he chopped vegetables seemed distant to her, as though they were part of another world. Her phone buzzed on the table, and though she already knew who it was, she hesitated before picking it up. It was her father, Richard Montgomery. The familiar coldness of his name made her stomach churn. Her hand trembled slightly as she answered, her voice tight. "Sophia, we need to talk." Her father's voice came through, as commanding as always, yet with an edge of something more. A flicker of desperation she had never heard before. "It's time we settled this." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She hadn't heard from her parents in weeks, not since the last time they had tried to convince her to return to their world. She had braced herself for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. "I'm not coming back, Dad," she said firmly, her voice a mix of resolve and weariness. "I've made my choice. I'm with Elliot. I'm happy." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low sigh. "Isabella, you're being foolish. You're throwing away your future, everything we've worked for. You're making a mistake you'll regret." She flinched at the harshness in his tone, but her resolve held strong. "I'm not making a mistake. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. This isn't about legacy or wealth. This isn't about legacy or wealth. It's about choosing a life that makes me happy." Her father's voice hardened again. "You think happiness will solve everything. You think love will pay the bills and protect you when the world turns against you. You're nothing without us, Sophia." The words stung, as they always did. But this time, they didn't break her. "No, Dad. I'm not nothing. I'm not a part of your world anymore, and I don't need it. I've found something better. I don't need your approval to know I've made the right choice." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Isabella thought the call had ended. But then her father's voice came through again, this time quieter, almost defeated. "You're really choosing this, man, over your family, your future." "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am." She could feel the weight of his disappointment through the phone, but she didn't let it shake her. This was her decision, and she would stand by it. "Goodbye, Dad," she said firmly, before hanging up the phone. The silence that followed felt louder than anything her father had said. She sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in her hand, trying to digest what had just transpired. Her heart ached with the knowledge that she would never be able to please them, never be the daughter they had dreamed of. And yet, there was a sense of peace in that truth. For the first time, she wasn't trying to mold herself into someone she wasn't. She had walked away, and though it hurt, she knew it was the right choice. Elliot appeared in the doorway, his face soft with concern. He had heard enough of the conversation to know what had happened. Without a word, he walked over to her, sitting beside her, on the couch, and taking her hand in his. His touch was grounding, warm, and unwavering. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know how hard this is for you." Isabella smiled faintly, her eyes filled with emotion.
I don't regret it.
Elliot kissed her hand gently. "You're stronger than you realize. And no matter what, I'm here. We're in this together." In that moment, Isabella realized just how far she had come. She had let go of the world that had defined her. The world that had tried to force her into a box she didn't belong in. She had chosen a life where love, not obligation, was the foundation. A life where she could truly be herself. And with Elliot by her side, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. She had made her decision, and it was one she would never regret. The weight of the decision settled deeper with each passing day, but with it, something else began to take shape. A quiet, resolute certainty that Isabella hadn't felt in years. The world she had once inhabited, full of carefully crafted appearances and suffocating expectations, seemed further away now. With each new challenge they faced together, she and Elliot grew stronger. But as the weeks passed, the reality of her family's unwillingness to let go of her lingered in the back of her mind. She had expected them to be angry, to try to manipulate her back into their world. But the calls and messages had slowed, and eventually there had been silence. It wasn't until a cold winter evening that the phone rang again, and Isabella knew in her heart that this call would be different. Elliot was in the kitchen preparing a simple meal, as he always did. The soft hum of the stove, the clink of utensils filled the air. Isabella, who'd been sitting by the window, staring out at the city lights flickering in the distance, reached for her phone. Her heart skipped when she saw her father's name flashing across the screen. It had been weeks since they last spoke, and she couldn't help but wonder why now. She hesitated before answering, glancing at Elliot briefly. He caught her eye, his gaze steady and knowing, and without a word, he gave her the space she needed. "Sophia," her father's voice came through, as cold and commanding as ever. "We've been trying to reach you. It's time we talked." Isabella exhaled slowly, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. She had expected this moment, knew it was inevitable. She had thought she was ready, but now, with the weight of it before her, the emotion swelled within her chest. She stood up from the window, turning to face the room as though to prepare herself for what was to come. "I've made my choice, Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions running wild inside her. "I'm not coming back. You have to accept that." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Isabella could almost hear her father's breath, measured and strained, as though he were trying to find the right words. Finally he spoke, the harshness of his words cutting through the quiet. "You're making a mistake, Sophia. You've chosen a life with nothing. No name, no future, no security. You're throwing it all away." Isabella felt the sting of his words, but she didn't let them break her. She had heard this before, this insistence that she wasn't capable of surviving outside of the life they had planned for her. She had been raised to believe that wealth and status were everything. But now, as she stood here, away from them, she realized that she was stronger than they had ever given her credit for. "No, Dad. I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing something better. I'm choosing to live for myself. I'm choosing love, not legacy. I'm choosing happiness, not duty," Isabella replied, her voice unwavering. There was another long pause, and when her father spoke again, his voice was softer, almost resigned. "You'll see, Sophia. One day, you'll realize the life you've chosen isn't the one you wanted. You'll come back to us. You'll come back to us. You'll see that we were right." Isabella's chest tightened, the weight of the years spent trying to please them pressing down on her. But she had come so far. She had found something real in Elliot, something worth fighting for. She couldn't go back, not to the life her parents had carved out for her. Not when she had finally learned how to live for herself. "I'm not coming back, Dad. I can't," she said softly, but with finality. She hung up the phone, her hand shaking slightly as she set it down on the table. For a moment, the world felt still. The silence that filled the room felt suffocating, and yet there was something freeing about it. She had made the hardest decision of her life, but it was the right one. Elliot walked into the room, his presence a calming force. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He could see it in her eyes, the weight, the sadness, but also the relief. Without saying a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close, holding her close. "I'm proud of you," he whispered against her hair. "You don't have to carry their expectations anymore. You found your own way." Isabella closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his embrace wash over her. She had done it. She had done it. She had chosen love, and in doing so, she had found freedom. It wasn't the life her parents had planned for her, but it was hers. And that, for the first time, was enough. As she looked up at Elliot, she knew that no matter what her family said or how they tried to pull her back, this was her life. And she would live it on her own terms, with him by her side. No more looking back, no more second guessing. It was time to move forward. As Isabella's journey unfolded, she was forced to make one of the most difficult decisions of her life, one that required her to let go of everything she had known and step into the unknown and step into the unknown. But through her story, we learn a powerful lesson. True happiness and fulfillment come not from external expectations, wealth, or status, but from embracing who you really are and living a life true to your own heart. Isabella's choice to walk away from her family's empire and choose love over legacy wasn't easy. She faced rejection, uncertainty, and fear, but she also found strength and clarity in the process. In the end, it wasn't the approval of her parents or the riches they offered her that brought her peace. It was the love she shared with Elliot, the connection they built, and the freedom she gained in living authentically. The story teaches us that sometimes, in order to find ourselves, we must leave behind the things that once defined us. We must be willing to face discomfort, fight against the tide, and pursue what truly makes us happy, even if it means challenging the very foundation of our past. So, what can we take away from Isabella's journey? The courage to make bold choices, the strength to follow our own path, and the wisdom to recognize that real wealth lies in love, authenticity, and the relationships we cherish. Where are you tuning in from? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join us for more stories that inspire, challenge, and motivate. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your takeaways and experiences with us.